Hi guys, welcome to another video of us solving a test together. This time we're going to solve a sample of the notoriously challenging Hudson Abstract Reasoning test. We're not going to solve a full test today. I think it's going to get too repetitive over time. What I am going to do is solve only 6 sample questions, but I am going to get really deep into solving methods and give you some valuable tips so you could then take this material and use it for practicing on your own and achieving the best results. So we're going to solve 6 practice questions. You can find 12 questions, including these 6 plus 6 more, on my website. See the link in the description. And I'm going to talk a bit about preparation recommendation for this test, which I think is absolutely crucial if you are serious about passing it with a high score. Okay, so let's get with the introduction, some basic details on the test. Okay, so the Hudson Abstract Reasoning test is designed to measure your ability to identify and apply rules and patterns through abstract reasoning, which is abstract shapes. The test contains around 30 questions. There's no accurate official information about that, but from what we know, it's 30 or 32 questions. There's also a shorter version available. So if you've taken the test and you can share the exact number of questions with us in the comments, that would be really useful. The test takes 15 minutes, which is not a lot of time, okay, to say the least. I will tell you right off the bat, you're not expected to solve all 30 questions. That the test instructions are going to specifically say that as well. It's virtually impossible to solve all 30 test questions in 15 minutes. You are expected to solve as many as possible, as many as you can. And I hope that the methods and tips I'm going to show you today are going to help you increase that number. Okay, so each question in the Hudson Abstract Reasoning test is going to comprise 3 sections. The first one is the data section, and this is probably the most important one, and where you're going to perform most of your work. This is the area in which you analyze and interpret the rules and pattern provided in the question. Then you're going to need to apply those rules that you've learned in the data section in the question area, which basically requires you to fill in the missing shape. Here, as you can see, there's a missing shape, and you're going to need to choose the correct one out of 5 answer options. What stands at the heart of the Hudson Reasoning test is the F keys. Okay, these buttons or keys, or however you want to call them, each one of them stands for a specific function that is applied to all shapes in the given row. So, for instance, here we have F key 2 and F key 4 activated. Okay, so each one of them is going to rotate, change the shape color, change the order of the shapes. We're going to look at that, at these most common patterns in just a minute. I know it looks pretty vague right now, but trust me, when we're going to start solving questions, it's going to be much more understood. So, as I said, we're going to have more common patterns. The 6 patterns that appear here are going to be nearly everything you're going to see throughout the Hudson test. You're going to have a change in size, rotation, color, horizontal or vertical line, shape, and reordering. Okay, so let's check out what each of those means with a very simple example. So the first 3 are pretty self-evident. You're going to change the size, the rotation, or the color of all shapes, as I mentioned earlier, all shapes in the same row. So here we can see that we're transitioning from a small square and a small circle to a big square and a big circle. Okay, here we can see the shapes rotating, and in the bottom row we can see that the shapes remained, all their characteristics remain the same except for the color. The next 3 are a bit more challenging, and I'm going to talk just a little bit more about them. So we have, first we have the horizontal and vertical line. And this is basically changing the, you can call it changing the state of the horizontal or vertical lines in the shape. If I have a horizontal line, I remove it. If I don't have one, I add it. So as you can see in the example here, in the first row, for instance, we are beginning with a circle that includes a horizontal line, and then we're going to remove it, whereas the second circle does not include one, and so we add it. Okay, so I hope that is understandable from this brief explanation, and again, we're going to see it coming back all the time in the questions that we're going to solve. The next category is the shape change, and that would mean that we preserve all characteristics of the shape except for its, you could say, its contour. Okay, so here we have a big white hexagon turning into a big white circle. Here we have a big black circle with horizontal line transitioning to a big black square with a horizontal line. Okay, so everything is preserved except for the contour of the shape. And the third and last is the reorder, in which we're going to take the shapes and reorder them from right to left. So the samples we'll be solving today are taken from this official sample test by Hudson. You can take it as many times as you want. You do not need to submit an email. All you need to do is answer a couple of very basic questions. I will add a link in the description in case you're not already familiar with this test. While this test is going to provide you with a pretty authentic practice experience, although not in terms of the level of difficulty, questions here do tend to be more basic than those in the actual assessment. The main problem with this test is that it's not going to provide you with either answers or explanations. The only thing you're going to get is the total number of correct answers you have answered. So this is where I hope to come in and provide you with answers and explanations so you can actually learn and benefit from this experience. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to cover before heading over to the questions themselves are the solving methods and the tips. I'm going to dig deep into the solving methods in this video, but I want to briefly explain what each method is and when you should use it, and to cover a little bit about the tips. So as for the methods, we're going to show two methods, the columns and the rows. The columns method is faster, it is more intuitive, it requires you to keep much more information in your head at every time, and therefore it is more suitable for basic questions. The rows method, on the other hand, is slower, it is more methodical, and it does not require you to keep big amounts of information in your head, and therefore it is more suitable for complex questions. Okay, admittedly, it is slower. It is sometimes going to give you some unnecessary information, okay, like function buttons which are not required in the question. But for the more complex question, I strongly recommend this approach, and the more you're going to practice it, the faster you're going to get. So about the tips, we're going to show two tips. We're going to show the lonely button tip and the counting. These are not always going to work. They're going to work on several cases, but when they do, they're going to be very effective in cutting down your solving time. Okay? So without further ado, let's get into solving question number 1. Take a moment, pause the video, you can try it for yourself, and then we're going to show the solution. Okay, so the answer here is answer D. And let's get into explaining why using the columns method. This is a more basic question and a classic example to show the columns method. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the leftmost column and see if we can understand which function operates on all three shapes. Okay, as we can see, we have here horizontal line, we can identify shape change, we can identify the size change. Okay, so as we can see, all the shapes on the left column are different in size than those in the right column. We have a small circle, big square, square, small circle, and so we can understand that the leftmost row, leftmost column, the F1, is going to be a size change. Okay, moving on to column number 2, we need to ask ourselves which function operates only on the top two shapes and not on the bottom one. And as we can see, we have in the two top rows, we have a shape change. The circle on the left, on the top row, the circle turns into a square, and in the middle row, the square turns into a circle, but in the bottom row, we have two circles. Okay, so in that case, we know that F2 stands for a shape change. Moving on to the third and last column, we can see that the process that these two rows undergo, and the third one does not, is the addition or removal of a horizontal line. Okay, as we can see, the circle in the top row does have a horizontal line, whereas the square on the right does not, and the process is vice versa in the bottom row. Now, looking at the question, we are done analyzing the data in the top section, and we can move on to the question itself. We know that we have only F1 and F3 activated, so we're going to remove the horizontal line from the square, and we're going to change its size, which is answer D. Okay, so I hope that clarified more about kind of a basic question to begin with, to clarify the rules, the F keys, everything that this question includes, and we're going to start keeping up the pace from now on and solving a bit more challenging questions and do it a bit faster as we go. Okay, question 2. Go ahead, try to solve the question yourself, pause the video if you want, and we're moving ahead to the solution. Okay, so the answer here is also D, and let's again use the columns method and see why. So again, we're going to start with the leftmost column and see which operation acts on both the top row and the bottom row, but not on the middle row. Okay, and the answer here is very clearly a color change. Okay, we can see the transition from a black shape to white shapes on the first row and vice versa in the bottom one. Moving on to the next column, we need a function that operates only in the top row, and that is the addition or removal of a vertical line. As you can see in the square and the circle, there is no vertical line in the basic shape, but after the functions are activated, we have vertical lines in both. Moving on to the third column, we need a function that operates on all 3 rows. And in this case, we can see that this is the reorder function. Okay, in each and every row, the order of the shapes is flipped from the beginning, and therefore the answer here is that F3 is reordering. And moving to the last and final column, evaluating F4, this is the addition or removal of a horizontal line. Okay, it is important for me to note that the columns method is an intuitive method. Okay, you need to be able to see these changes as they go, and in the more basic questions, you are going to be able to do that. You are going to be able to hold that information inside your mind, and it's going to do the work for you. But in the more complex questions, you do need to start isolating pieces of information, and that's where the rows method comes in. So we're going to see that in the next couple of questions. So moving on to the question area, after we have analyzed all pieces in the data, we know that we need to add a vertical line and the horizontal line because only F2 and F4 are activated. So this means that we're going to have a big square on the left with both a horizontal line and a vertical line, and a small black square on the right with neither horizontal nor vertical line, which is precisely answer D. Moving on to question 3. Again, take a moment, look at the question, try solving it, and we're going to move ahead to the solution. Okay, so the answer here is answer E. This time we're going to solve it with the rows method, even though I assume you can beat this question using the columns method as well. I think it's a pretty decent basic question to start showing the methodical process of going through the rows. And this process goes as follows. We start with the row that has the least number of unknown buttons. In the beginning of the question, that's going to be 2 buttons. And the reason is that looking at a row which has 3 activated buttons, you're going to find it really difficult to understand what's going on. It's going to be a bit too much information case, but when you do have 2 buttons, it's pretty easy for you to understand, okay, I have rotation and color change, or I have shape change and adding a horizontal line. It's going to be pretty easy when you have only 2 buttons to identify what patterns are going in the question. Then you're going to move on to the row which shares the least number of unknown buttons with the row you have just picked. And this is going to allow you to deduce from each of the 2 rows the most information in the least amount of time. Then you're going to repeat the process. Again, you're going to move to the next row and the next row based on the things you already know, and always isolate the least amount of information that you need. If possible, it is recommended to start with buttons that already appear in the question section. Okay, because these are only the buttons that you need to know. Okay, you do not need any other buttons, and therefore, if you can, not always going to be possible, but preferably you should start with those. Okay, getting back to question 3, we can start solving it with the row method. In this case, I can choose either row because all rows have 2 buttons, but for the sake of practice, I will choose row 1. So in the top row, I have 2 buttons, which I can see are size change and a horizontal line. Okay, I can see the square here does not have a horizontal line, whereas this one does, and the vice versa with the circle, and both shapes are changing only their size. So I know that one of these buttons is going to be size change and the other is going to be a horizontal line. I do not yet know which is which. And that is why I'm going to move to a row which shares the least number of activated buttons with row 1, which is row 2. Okay, I have only F key 1, and here I can very easily see that this is the additional removal of a horizontal line. Okay, these shapes do not change their size, but horizontal line is either added or removed. Okay, and therefore I can deduce that F1 is a horizontal line, and as a result, F4 is a size change. Okay, so by looking at these 2 rows, I already have 2 very important pieces of information. Okay, so moving on to the next row, which based on our method is going to be the row which shares the least unknown information. That is row 2. Here I have only 1 unknown button. I already know F1, and I only need to find out F3. Okay, so already knowing that F1 is a horizontal line, I can easily deduce that F3 is a reorder. Okay, we can see that the shapes, both shapes, the square and the circle, they change sides, and therefore F3 is the reorder function. Basically, that's all I need. I can solve the question. I can look at F3 and F4. I know that I need to take the 2 shapes in the question and reorder them, and I need to change their size, and that is precisely answer E. Okay, so that was a quick demonstration for the rows method in a question that could arguably be solved quicker using the columns method, but now I am going to move to a slightly more challenging question in which I believe you're going to find more use for the rows method. Okay, so I want to pause real quick to talk about preparation. It is always important to prepare for any test, but in the case of the Hudson test, it is absolutely essential. Okay, as I mentioned, time constraints are perhaps the most important thing in this test, and if you want to truly solve these questions quickly, then you need to turn these processes of solving into somewhat of a second nature. To do them over and over and over again until you fully wrap your head around them. This is why I strongly recommend Job Test Prep's preparation pack. It is both the most accurate preparation available today and the one with the largest volume of practice. You can find the link in the description. Full disclosure, I am an affiliate. These are affiliate links. If you do find this video helpful and do decide to make a purchase, I would really appreciate it if you could do it through one of these links. It really does help me in keeping creating this content for you and other candidates like you at no additional cost to you. So thank you very much, and let's get back to solving questions. Okay, question number 4. Again, take a moment to look, take a moment to solve, and we're moving on. Okay, so the answer here is A, and let's start using the rows method to solve this question too. Okay, so this time we have a definite candidate to start with, and that's going to be row number 2. Okay, we have here only 2 activated buttons, and looking at the changes that these shapes go through, it is pretty easy to see that these changes are the addition or removal of a vertical line and the change of color. Okay, so we know that F1 and F2, each of them stands for one of these functions. Again, we do not yet know which is which. And that's why we're going to need to move on to a different row which shares only one button, only one function with row 2, and that's going to be row 1, which both rows share only F1. So looking at row 1, we can ask ourselves, which of these 2 actions are performed on these shapes, okay, moving from left to right? And the answer obviously is the color change. Okay, we can see that the state of the vertical lines remains the same. The circle does not have a vertical line, whereas the square does, but the color is changed, and that's pretty easy to see. And therefore we know that F1 stands for a color change, and we can easily deduce that F2, on the other hand, stands for a vertical change. So only by looking at these 2 rows, we have already understood half of the necessary information. So following our method, we're going to move on to the row which has the least amount of unknown information, and that is row 3. We already know F1 and F2. We only have one missing function key, which is F3. And looking at these shapes, it's pretty easy to spot that the missing piece of information is the addition or removal of a horizontal line. Okay, so following the process and moving on to the next row, which contains the least amount of unknown information, that is row 1, in which we already discovered F1, F2, and F3. All that remains is F4, and that appears only on the first row. And after applying both F1 and F3, we can easily see that the remaining function is reordered. Okay, the circle and the square switch sides. They're reordered right to left. And now we have all the pieces of information required to solve the question. And looking at the question area, we know that we need to reorder the 2 shapes, and we need to change the state of the vertical line. So this means that on the right, we're going to have a small black square with a vertical line, and on the left, we're going to have a big white square with only a horizontal line because the vertical one is removed, and that is exactly answer A. So I want to stop for a minute and talk about one of the tips, the lonely button tip. The lonely button tip would be the proper way to start this particular question, and that is why I show it to you after we've already solved it. So you may be able to remember it better and when to use it. The lonely button means a button that is the only one which appears in the column. Okay, as we can see in this example, F4 appears only in one row. Okay, so only once in its column, and we need to look at the shapes of this lonely button and ask ourselves which operation of those 6 common patterns that we already know works only on these 2 shapes. And the answer, as we already know, as we've already seen in the question, is reorder. Okay, we can see that only in this example do the shapes switch sides. So when you come across a lonely button, quickly go over in your head on all the familiar patterns and ask yourself which one operates only in this pair. So this tip is going to give you a head start. It's not going to solve all the questions for you. It is going to save you a lot of time in the beginning, getting you a very important piece of information in very short time. And that's why it is especially useful when the said lonely button is in the question too, as in this case. Okay, we have F4 in the question. I already solved half the question using only that trick. Okay, the last thing is a word of caution. Be careful when you use this tip, okay, and practice it beforehand. Sometimes the overload of information in especially more complex questions is going to be pretty big and may mislead you when you are carrying out this tip. So make sure to practice it and rehearse it as much as you can. It really is a valuable tip that's going to save you a lot of time in the actual test. Okay, so the final question we are going to solve is a summary question, and this one is not taken from the Hudson sample test, which I discussed in the beginning of this video. The reason is that this question is quite more challenging than the ones that you're going to find on the sample test. It has been discussed on Reddit. I will put a link in the description so you can see that discussion too. And we're going to solve it now step by step using everything that we have learned thus far. Okay, so the correct answer here is answer A, and let's move on to using the row method and the lonely button tip to understand why. So we're going to start, as I mentioned, with the lonely button tip, and we're going to look at F5, which appears only on the second row. And we're going to ask ourselves, looking at these two shapes and understanding that only they are going through F5 change, what is that change? Okay, and you may be tempted to say that this is a shape change, but if you look more closely, you would see that had these shapes gone through shape change, then that would be it. There would be only one button in the entire row that would work, okay, that would be activated. And that is not the case. We have three buttons, and that's kind of an example of what I meant when I said earlier that sometimes when you apply multiple rules into shapes, they're going to look like something else. So this could be either a single shape change or three buttons doing different things, yielding the same result. Okay, so we need to be careful here. Right, but what we can notice is that looking at all three rows, the only change that happens in the second row of the ones we know is the reorder. Okay, here we have the hexagon on the left, whereas here the hexagon is on the right, and you kind of can start to get a feel about the other two changes and what they are. So this is definitely a reorder. Okay, so based on our method, we're going to start with the first row, which is the only one which contains only two buttons. And as I explained earlier, when you're looking at only two buttons, it's going to be much easier for you to see the changes that these shapes undergo. And in this case, we can easily see that these changes are the rotation and the color. Okay, looking only at these two buttons, ignoring any other information, it's pretty clear that we have rotation and a color change. Right, so we know that F2 and F4 stand for rotation and color, but we do not yet know which is which, and that is why we're going to need to cross this information with a second row. Now, based on our method, we're going to choose the row that shares the least number of unknown buttons with the previous one, okay, and that is row 2. In row 3, we have both F4 and F2 activated, so it would be too much information. We want to isolate it. That's why we choose row 2, which shares only F4 with row 1. And looking at these two pairs here, in row 2, we need to ask ourselves, if I know that these shapes are going through either rotation or a color change, which one of these actions have these shapes gone through? And the answer is, of course, color. Okay, they did not rotate. The change was color, and therefore I can immediately deduce that F4 stands for color change, and as a result, F2 will stand for rotation. So now we're going to move on to the next row, which has, as the process dictates, the least amount of unknown information. In this case, I could have chosen either row 2 or 3, because only F3, function key number 3, is missing. In this case, I chose row 3, and knowing that these shapes go through rotation and color change, since function keys F2 and F4 are activated, that leaves F3 to be responsible for size change. Okay, and here I have all function keys explained and understood, and I can move on to solving the question itself. Okay, so looking back at the question, I know that the shapes on the left need to undergo three different functions. They need to be reordered, they need to be rotated, and they need to change their size. So here's another quick tip for you. In many cases, I would be able to look only at one of these shapes. Okay, so that is going to save you a little bit of mental resources and a little bit of time. So let's pick the square on the right. Okay, so I know I need to rotate it, I know I need to change the size, and I need to reorder it. So it's going to be on the left, it's going to be white, big, and have a vertical instead of a horizontal line, which exists only in answer A, and that is why this is the correct answer. You can do the same for yourself with the circle. The result would be the same. Okay, so the very last thing I want to be covering today is the counting tip, which is going to work in cases when you have 3 or more shapes, and it's going to reveal 3 of the 6 known patterns: the horizontal line, the vertical line, and the shape change. It's not always going to work. There are specific conditions that need to be met, but when it does work, it's going to be really helpful in cutting down solving time, so you should be familiar with it and give it a shot whenever it is possible. Okay, so I'm going to use this particular question, another question taken from Hudson's sample test, to explain this tip. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remember the three patterns I have just mentioned: the vertical line, the horizontal line, and the shape change. And I'm going to start counting on both sides of the function keys the number of shapes I have from each trait. So let's start with the vertical lines. Okay, on the left-hand side, I have on the top row 3 vertical lines, whereas I have only 1 on the right-hand side, and on the third row, I have 1 vertical line on the left, whereas 3 vertical lines on the right. And that tells me that in these 2 rows, I have the vertical line function activated. And the only button that is shared among these 2 rows is F3. And that immediately tells me, only by counting the number of shapes, that F3 is the vertical line function. I'm going to do the exact same thing with the horizontal lines. I'm going to count 3 horizontal lines on the left-hand side and 1 horizontal line on the right-hand side of the top row. And this tells me that this row also contains a horizontal line function key. Since I already know that F3 is the vertical line function key, that leaves only F1 as the horizontal line one. And again, the same thing with the last remaining pattern, the shape pattern: 3 circles to the left, 1 circle to the right in the bottom row. And this tells me that the third row contains a shape changing function key. Since I already know that F3 is the vertical line function key, that leaves only F2 as the shape change function key. And here you have it. Okay, without doing nothing other than counting shapes, I have nearly all the information I need for this question, and it's going to be pretty intuitive and pretty easy without getting into solving complex patterns. So that's the last tip for you. That's it, guys. We're done. Thank you so much for watching. In the description, you can find the links I mentioned, both for the full sample test, the 12 questions on my website, and the prep recommendation I discussed. I strongly recommend that you do prepare for the Hudson test, and if you choose to do so, I would really appreciate it if you could do it through one of my affiliate links, either here on YouTube or on my website. It really does go a long way in helping me to keep creating this content with no additional cost to you. So thanks again, good luck, and see you next time.